other than the primary language for most Northern Māori at that time. In 1871, there is debate on the Native Schools Bill of that year, and the member for Northern Māori, Wiremu Kātene, acknowledged that Māori had not taken up education as they might, saying, "We find out the want of it here as we cannot understand all that is said." Dr. Barrington accepted that Kātene was saying that from his perspective, Māori wanted to learn English, and they wanted their children to learn English too. In July 1873, Parore te Awaha, Waitangi and Puhi Parore of Mangawhare near Dargaville wrote to resident magistrate Rogan requesting the establishment of a school for the teaching of the English language, and to quote from them, "Our first word is to talk about the school. Great is our approval. Let schools be established in these districts that our children may be taught the English language and other branches of education, namely reading, figures, and etc." And then we come to an intriguing document. In 1876, Wi Te Hākiro Rangatira of the Bay of Islands, together with 336 others, signed a petition addressing a number of matters. Now, the petition's a lengthy document, and I think it covers a number of topics, and it's important. And I've provided that to you in a bundle Q17, and I want to take you through the petition. It proposed a radically new way of teaching Māori children through two schools. One for Māori who spoke te reo and who would be educated in te reo, and one for children of 2 years or more, just when they were beginning to speak, to be educated in English and only English, with English becoming their first language. So this petition and proposal is coming from Māori within this district. More particularly, the petitioners sought the amendment of the Native Schools Act so that all Māori children would attend one of two schools, the two schools I've mentioned. All Māori children, kua mōhio rawa ki te reo I o... Do you have a copy of this? So, all Māori children, kua mōhio rawa ki te kōrero I o rātou reo Māori ake anō me ngā ritenga Māori katoa hoki, which was translated as knowing only their own Māori tongue, also having a knowledge of all Māori customs, should be taught reading, writing and arithmetic in Māori. All other children of 2 years, I'll stick with the English, all other children of 2 years, when they're just able to speak, should be taught the English language and all the knowledge which you, the Europeans, possess. The petition stated that if this happened, our children will soon attain the acquirements of the Europeans. The petition was frank in acknowledging the difficulties that children who already spoke te reo had in learning English, and frank too in suggesting that an English language education for these children, at that stage the vast majority of Māori children, was a waste of time if they were only to return to a Māori-speaking environment. So just to quote from that petition, it said, and this is the English text, with reference to the first proposal that only 3 things should be taught to those who can speak Māori, we explain our reasons. First, the extreme difficulty of teaching them the English language. Second, and most important, even if the youths were to attain the acquirements which are taught to them after they have long been speaking nothing but Māori and observing only Māori customs, if they were to return to their Māori kāingas, it would not be long before they fell away and became as those who had not been to school at all, or a great deal worse. This is a great waste of public money and of the land of the parents of the children, who presumably are giving the land for the schools, and it's also a waste of time. And the petition gave the example of a Māori boy educated in a Roman Catholic school, having later been taken to Rome to learn Latin, Hebrew, Greek, English, French and other languages, ordained a priest and returned to the Hokianga. I don't know if this was a hypothetical example or not. The petition stated that after living with his tribe for 2 to 3 years, mahue ake tōna pirihitanga huki ana ki tōna Māoritanga anō, he abandoned his office and relapsed into his former state. The petition said the time and money spent by the Catholic Church on the boy might as well have been thrown into the sea, and all the schools in which our children have hitherto been educated have only had the same result, and thinking will anticipate only the same thing in the future. In terms of the second school, the petition explained that English should be taught to young Māori children so that it became their first language, and I set out a quote there. The petitioners explained the importance of the education having a permanent effect on the children. They also explained that they had trialled the system with some children with positive outcomes. English only would be allowed at the second school, and to quote from the English text of the petition, there should be a general playground for the European and Māori children together. There should not be a word of Māori allowed to be spoken in the school, and the master, his wife and children should be persons altogether ignorant of the Māori language. Now, some might interpret the petition as suggesting that there be an ongoing education system comprising 2 schools, one where Māori children would be taught in te reo, and the other where Māori and Pākehā children would be taught in English. But that's not what the petition is saying. A more accurate reading, and in my submission the only accurate reading of the petition, is that the first type of school was seen as a temporary measure only. The logical outcome of teaching English as a first language to all Māori children from the age of 2, which is what the petition sought, was that within a generation there would no longer be any Māori children speaking te reo as a first language, and no longer any need for the Māori language schools. As the petition concluded in the English language, if the Parliament would consent to embody these suggestions in an amendment to the Native Schools Act, it would be certain that in 21 years' time the Māori children would be on an equal footing as regards their education with the Europeans. But if the present system is to be continued, if our children were to be taught under it for 1,000 years, they would attain to what is called, quote marks, knowledge, end quote marks. It is doubtful that any of the signatories to the petition wanted or sought the actual demise of te reo Māori, but the clear message of the petition was that the government needed to provide all Northland Māori children from the time they first started to speak a school where only English was taught, spoken and written. It appears that Māori parents sought to implement an English-only rule in native schools in Northland from about this time. So, and by time we're talking about the 1870s.
And was that already happening in the schools though? I mean, you've spoken about the codes and the incentives that there were for teachers to learn Māori, to speak Māori, that there was the ability and the policy that allowed for Māori speaking. But by that time...
By this time we have a lot of Māori being taught and used in schools. So by this time we're talking about the 1870s or so. And so the evidence has shown us that quite clearly by 1867 the problem's been exactly that. Schools are teaching in te reo Māori, and that needs to change.
But still within a overall context of assimilation of Māori?
Oh, I think the initial, going back to the start, the initial instruction to Hobson was an assimilationist one. It was one that was genuinely held at that time. I haven't seen an express mention of that same desire at about this time. And what's happening at about this time, and by this time I'm meaning the 1870s and 80s, is, as I've just gone through, we've got evidence that Māori people in this inquiry district are saying we need to stop. We need to have a school where only English is taught, and it's not good enough. There must have been a reason for the petition and to be so detailed on this topic. I think we can infer from that Māori are frustrated that their children are not getting the opportunity to learn the English language, and they're wanting to do something about that. I think that's an inescapable conclusion. And so that only says to me that Māori are asking that the system be changed so the system isn't working well enough, and that implies that schooling still isn't using enough English. Why else would they petition otherwise?
And I suppose the other side of it, isn't it, that Māori are finding to have, for example, an effective voice in Parliament, for example, that they need to be able to speak English.
Yes, and I think that quote from Kātene made the point.
Yes.
And no doubt other quotes would too.
Yes, and indeed to engage within the European economy on an equal footing. We're moving a long way from the middle ground, aren't we?
Very much so.
All right, thank you.
So there was that, from a Crown perspective, from the 1830s onwards, would you say? There was that encouraging English to be the predominant language through the schools. And what you're saying is that Māori wanted things to run a bit quicker.
So I didn't quite catch the time period you're talking about, Your Honour.
1830s or 1840s?
So from 1839 onwards, the Crown is wanting an education, and from 1839...
Sorry, 1847, the date I've got here.
Yes, from 1839 through to... I guess it would be 1847, wouldn't it? The Crown is really just leaving it's supporting the missionaries and teaching in Māori. From 1847, it's starting to impose itself a bit more in this, but still supporting the missionaries. The missionaries are in fact teaching then in Te Reo Māori. In 1867, the government, and it seems to, the problem by 1867 is it's not working. We've been supporting the missionary schools to this point, but the Māori children aren't picking up the English language, and the government has to do something, and so it changes tact, and it provides for the establishment of its own schools, and it also starts setting in place requirements that schools must show that they are actually teaching English. So it's really that period. You can see a shift in Crown policy, and my point is that despite the shift, it's not having an impact on levels of Te Reo Māori even at this time, as I'm going to take you through. So I'm still in my paragraph 78. And I say there, it appears Māori parents sought to implement an English-only rule in native schools in Northland about this time. At that time, the general management of native schools was under a committee elected annually by adult Māori in the relevant district. Which is interesting, isn't it? Just segueing into issue 1, the management, the control of the school is both the Crown and Māori, as this shows. There is evidence that in March 1884, the school committee of the Waimā Native School, comprising Hone Mohi Tāwhai, Noa Maihi, Hohepa Kātete, or Hohepa Taupaki, and Hamiora Paipera, or Hamiora Takiro, imposed their own rule that a penalty of 5 shillings be paid by any person or parent found speaking Māori to a child on the school grounds in school hours. The minutes of the committee, as summarised and translated from Māori into English by Dr. Patu Hohepa, read, and even if I just pause there, it's intriguing, isn't it? The minutes of the committee are in Te Reo Māori, the adults writing and managing their own school, or the school for their children, in the Māori language. And what is their rule? To supplement the law forbidding the speaking of Māori in class or in the school grounds and school hours, no person or parent can engage a child in speaking Māori, and in such cases any child can inform on that person or parent to the committee, who shall be empowered to fine that person or parent the sum of 5 shillings. If it's a matter of urgency or extreme importance, the child can be removed out of sight or hearing of other children before any communication takes place. Now, it's intriguing because there's reference there to the law forbidding the speaking of Māori in class or in the school grounds and school hours. And as we've discussed, there was no such rule in either the Native Schools Act of 1867 or the relevant code at that time, which was the Code of 1880. It may be a reference to the policy of teaching English and discouraging use of Te Reo Māori, but if so, it misconstrues that policy. In any case, the committee's viewpoint in passing a new rule is certainly understandable. It is consistent with the general viewpoint as seen in the petition I took you through, that only English be taught to Northland Māori children. There is evidence from data collected by the Department of Education during the first quarter of the 20th century of the use of the Māori language in the home of students attending native schools in this inquiry district. And what I've done is set this out in an appendix to the submission, and the evidence is quite interesting, and I'd like to take you to it. I'd like to take you to the first page of the appendix, which is document number 3.3.415A. And what the Crown's done is it's used the figures from the table set out in the AJHRs, and it's set them out as they relate to schools in the Northland District. And the time period we're talking about here is this was published in the AJHRs of 1910. And so if you're at that appendix, you'll see that it lists all the schools, and with real specificity lists for each school the numbers of Māori children attending, the numbers of European children attending. And the intriguing thing is the table sets out, of the Māori children, it sets out who was speaking English in the home, and it's as specific as identifying boys and girls separately, and also Māori speaking Māori in the home. And I can see that that's there on the screen. It'll be hard for people to see, but if you do get a copy of the Crown submissions, have a read of it. It's really quite intriguing. And if we just focus on even just the first 5 schools there on the left-hand side, these are Māori children speaking English in the home. There are none. Te Pupuke, Tauwai, Whakarara, Whangape, which might be, I'm not sure, is Whangape outside of this district, I'm not sure. Pararenga, sorry. No Māori children in those schools are said to be speaking English in the home. But if we look at the numbers from those schools who are speaking Māori in the home, they all are. 45 children in total at Te Pupuke, 32 at Tauwai, Whakarara, there are 47, and so on and so on. And if you look down the table, it speaks for itself. There are just a few children at just a few of the schools who are speaking English in the home. Now, accept that there would have to be some qualifications to this. I don't know that we have a good explanation as to precisely how all these different figures were put together. But it's the evidence that we do have, and without question it shows the vast majority of Māori children in northern native schools at 1910 are speaking Māori at home. Now, we don't have equivalent figures for Māori attending board schools at the time. If we return to paragraph 80 of my main document, the data shows that by 1909, and indeed 1920, which is the next table in my appendix, Te Reo Māori was still used at home by the vast majority. That's 97.6% in 1909. The table was published in 1910, but I think it related to 1909. And it's almost the same in 1920, 96.7% in 1920. It's showing that the vast majority of Northland Māori children attending native schools in Northland were still using Māori at home. In 1910, the Minister of Education tabled in Parliament a I then in the written document just go through the figures to give you some even more specific conclusions that we can draw from those facts and figures. I don't think I need to take you through there. The point is that the indication is that by 1909 in Northland, Māori children are almost exclusively speaking, it appears, Māori at their home. Dr. Barrington agreed that the figures, my paragraph 82, he agreed that the figures did show for Northland native schools the vast majority of Māori students spoke Māori at home. In the majority of Northland native schools, no Māori child spoke English at home, and the figures indicated that native schools had by 1909 little impact on the use of Te Reo Māori in Māori homes in this inquiry district. Now, if I can...
oh, sorry, Mr. Irwin,
yes.
Just stopping you there. What is the context for that study being undertaken? Do we know that? What the Education Department was trying to gain from doing that?
I don't know that. We have the report, and yes. I can only refer you to the report. Yes.
It didn't produce a policy change that...
Not that I can remember.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I just can't remember.
That's all right.
I did write this submission quite a long time ago, but
yes.
this...
well, we can look at this report and see.
Yes, I'm just wondering if, you see, what I was doing is looking for the evidence around use of Te Reo Māori, and I was
yes.
focusing on the figures. I can't remember, but you could easily go to the AJHRs and see if there is a covering report, and one would expect there would have to be some such cover report, even just to explain the figures.
Yes. Oh, well, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Sorry, when you say that would be helpful, thank you. I was suggesting you.
Oh, all right, I'll let you off the hook.
I'm more than happy to go and see what's there. Why don't I? Because I'm doing a few other things too. Now I wanted to take the Tribunal back to a a wee quote from the Te Reo Māori report by the Tribunal at paragraph 15. So back in my document, paragraph 15. And if we just look at the figures there, the Tribunal said in that report, Dr. Biggs supplied us with figures showing that in 1913, 90% of Māori school children could speak Māori. Now, what the tables that I've pointed you to show is that I assume that Dr. Biggs's reference there to 90% was a national figure. In this inquiry district, it was much higher, it appears. It was at least that level. And I have to add the qualifications that the figures I'm pointing to are figures from Māori children in native schools and not in board schools. Now, just over the next, so if I come back to page 29 of the main document, the bottom of that page at my paragraph 84, similar figures as I've foreshadowed were provided in the report of 1921. Again, a table in the relevant report set out the exact numbers of Māori children attending specific native schools speaking Māori in the home, and in the appendix I set out the relevant data for schools in this district, and the figures are very much the same. And it appears, I think as I've said earlier, that by 1920, 96.7% of all Māori children attending a native school in this district spoke Māori in their home, which is fractionally more than the national average. My paragraph 86. Dr. Barrington agreed that for Northern native schools, the vast majority of students spoke Māori at home. The figures showed that in the majority of Northern native schools, no Māori child spoke English at home, though Dr. Barrington expected by this date some Māori children would have spoken English at home, and to the extent the figures are accurate, the figures indicated that native schools had by 1920 little impact on the use of Te Reo Māori in Māori homes in this inquiry district. Crown submits this evidence as telling. More than 50 years after the establishment in 1867 of a government-run native school system designed to teach Māori children the English language, the vast majority of Northland Māori children attending native schools spoke Māori in their homes. This shows that the native school system in itself, where the English language was promoted and the Māori language discouraged in teaching, had little impact on the ability of Northland Māori to speak te reo outside schools. Other evidence bears out this conclusion. And I refer here to a publication in 1931 by W.S. Dale of Auckland University, who noted the steady increase in the number of native schools. It's noted that students at those schools and teachers at those schools between the years of 1881 to 1929. So Dale is noting the steady increase of just the amount throughout the country of native schools and teachers and students. And the expectation was that more and more Māori teaching attending these schools would speak English. Dale said that the statistics didn't bear this out. In 1913, 90% of children at native schools spoke only Māori outside school. In 1923, that figure was 82%. Now, I took you to a figure from the Te Reo Māori report, and I think that's where that's the source of that figure from 1913.
Kia ora, Mr. Irwin. These figures that you're giving us, and those on the previous pages as well, how were they collected? Did teachers supply them, or do we know how they're arrived at?
No, I don't. No, and I don't know that the report in the AJHRs explains that either. And one assumes every native school in the country, literally, is set out in the report. And so one would tend to assume that it's being, that the data is being compiled, my assumption is, by the teachers. I guess it's possible that someone would come in and review each school and undertake that assessment, but presumably that's the case. And presumably too, I mean, there has to be some question in that regard as to the way in which different teachers are applying the same questions or the same standards adequately. So there has to be a question around that. But even so, and I'd submit that it is fairly telling stuff, and it's difficult to see quite how it gives an inaccurate position. It might not, I've given you some very specific percentages, and maybe I've got a bit too eager in doing that. But I think it is still fair to say the vast majority, more than 90% of Māori students, Māori children in Northland appear to be speaking, at least those that are attending the native schools, speaking Māori. Actually, it does occur to me that I don't have evidence to show how many Māori students are attending board schools, and we have very exact evidence as to the numbers of children attending native schools. And in fact, I guess if somebody could be so bothered, it would be interesting to try and find population figures to try and correlate this at the same time. I don't know if it could be done, and I don't know if there's any evidence around the numbers of Māori children attending board schools. Might be something the Tribunal would be interested in looking into. Sorry, Your Honour.
So when did things all start going downhill?
Well, we're pretty much
90% of kids in schools, Māori kids in schools today, certainly don't speak Māori.
Yeah, we're pretty much getting there, Your Honour.
Okay.
But just sticking with with my paragraph 89, and this is a publication from 1931, but it's making comments about the period of time of 1913 and 1923, saying, and the point of the publication is to say, look, we would have expected more Māori children to be less fluent in Te Reo Māori, but the figures don't bear that out. And as I say in answer to Dr. Parsonson, I'm not sure how those figures were collated. But they're all consistent too, aren't they, at this period of time? The figures all do seem to be consistent. Dale considered that despite anticipations to the contrary, Te Reo Māori was not in 1931 dying out. Dr. Barrington agreed that to the extent Dale's figures could be relied on as being accurate, they suggested native schooling had had little impact on the use of Te Reo outside schools by 1923. Dr. Barrington said the basis on which these statistics were collected was not clear, but did say the statistics were, but did not say the statistics were inaccurate, and did not give a reason to suggest the statistics were inaccurate. In 1930, Douglas Ball, then Inspector of Native Schools, published a survey of native schools in the Education Gazette, in which he said the Māori language is still the mother tongue of the Māori race. Investigation showed that 99.6% of the Māori homes, Māori is the only language regularly spoken. From the present education point of view, this is a distinct disadvantage, he said, and only 3.3% of cases had the mother tongue given place to the adopted language. Dr. Barrington agreed that the basis on which the figures quoted, Dr. Barrington agreed that on the basis of the figures quoted, this showed native schools had had little impact on the use of te reo outside schools by 1930. While that conclusion seems incontrovertible, the data above does have its limitations, and it's important to recognise that. So I've mentioned some of those, I think, already. The figures do not reveal which language Māori children attending other schools in Northland were using, such as board schools and high schools, which I've mentioned. In addition, the data doesn't make any assessment of the quality of the language being spoken in the home, and also whether Māori was exclusively spoken or whether it was spoken in addition to English.
The change is coming, Mr. Irwin.
And my next heading, Your Honour, is a change occurs.
Should we leave the change for tomorrow? It's 5 o'clock.
Perfectly.
Kia ora tātou. Any matters before we...
No,
Mr. Irwin and
I think we'll just carry on
raised the issue Kia ora tātou. Mr. Hockley raised the issue this morning about wanting to ensure that we do have the opportunity to hear the whāngarei and mahurangi submissions, and we're still on time to do that?
Well, yes, I'd just like to reassess where we're at in the morning, okay. If we may. I'd just like to speak to my colleagues about the issue 13 submission.
Any other matters from Council? No birthdays today? No? Ka pai. Mawai tā tātou kariki e taki. Matua Bob. Kia ora tātou. Willow, no news? No news, Willow? Matua Bob.
Tēnā rā tātou te whānau hui mai nei hui nei tēnei rā. A koe roa tātou noho ana e whakalonga ni nā kōrero katoa wene o tātou ranga tira e tēnei wā, ko tā mai te haora ke tātou, ke tituru tātou ki te wākainga. Ro reira, hokira ki nā tīmatanga kōrero, tīmati mai tātou ro tā marangi tēnei ata, tēnei wā ka taupuki anu ki roto i aia, no reira ke inui tātou. E te atu ka harau ka koe rā kei mua ki muri e mātoi nā wā katoa, ko mātoi nā pono inui ki atu ko mai tō wairu tapu te harau nui ki roto ki tēnei o mātou. Mā mātou ara hei tohu tau I hou mai kia mātou māramatanga ro tōna whakaaro katoa I kōru tia e tēnei rā. E te mō a he tō poronga I tēnei wā, tō rei te pāki aro ho mai koe kia mātou. E pāka ino I kia koe tō mātou wehewehenga I tēnei a hei mana kia tia ki mātou nui te hulai kia te aurai mātou ki tō mātou tohe utanga. Mana kia tō mātou kau mātou Pio mātou tamariki, tā mea māwiwi ana, tā mea ngoi kore no honte pōritangi tō wātou marae, hori no e te motu. E pāko eni rau ki nā inu e poronga kia koe tēnei wā, ka inu I tonu eni mea katoa anō, I unga tenga tāu tama, tō mātou kai whakalau kreiti. Āmene. E ata e wai te pawa tātou, whakāria mai. Whakāria mai. Tori peka. Ki au te aho mai ngā roto I te pō hei kona au he te ro atu Tia ho mai nā roto i te pō ei kona ti te ata whaita o tātou ari ki rungi a tātou o te matpere tamata wera tapa te amene. Kia ora.
Same time tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen, get an early seat. You might have to bring tickets or bring all the whānau and get in early. Thank you.